Will AGI destroy money? Will the future be cashless? This is actually a question that comes up more often than you might think. So, we're going to unpack the idea of resource based economies and a cryptocurrency future. So, let's get right into it. So, first, just a little bit of background in terms of history. When we say money, when we say currency, what do we mean? Uh, Today, obviously, you're familiar with it as paper cash. Most of it is exchanged digitally today. But there's a few primary criteria, a few primary functions that money serves. So, first is it's a medium of exchange. This allows you to buy and sell goods and services with an abstracted thing. And money and currency of various forms has existed for quite a long time. There's evidence that proto-humans, exchanged things like beads and shells and round stones or whatever in order to basically drive a primitive economy. It's also a store of value. And so what this means is it doesn't store like something that is materially value. It's not like hoarding food, but by virtue of the fact that money allows you to accumulate wealth, you can save it for a rainy day. The idea there is then you can save it for a later time and use it. And because it's a store of value, that offers a pretty unique functionality. That's why we have bank accounts. That's why we have banks. It is a unit of account. So this is an interesting one in that it is an abstracted representation of value, and it allows you to account to say like, okay, how much is my property over here worth? How much is this service that I can provide worth? It creates a way of attaching a number to pretty much everything, which is one of the most useful things that you can do, particularly in an environment where you have to monitor scarcity and deal in a scarce environment and allocate resources based on what you need more and what costs more. As already mentioned, there's been physical and digital forms, whether it's cold hard cash, gold doubloons, or cryptocurrency, or whatever. And then finally, legal tender. So legal tender is that's basically legal jargon for saying the law of the land is that you can accept money in exchange for goods and services, and that's part of the fiat currency system. Now, we can't talk about money and cash without talking about the gold standard. So the gold standard was basically true up until the early 20th century, wherein all nations respected gold as a valid form of exchange, valid form of currency, and all other currencies were tied directly to the value of gold. So this gold standard basically was a way of saying, okay, regardless of what your local currency is worth, it will convert to a standard amount of gold, which is then portable to other nations. And this kind of fixed exchange rate, and I'm not saying it was fixed globally, but that basically incentivized every nation to have a reserve of gold. And of course, like in America, we have Fort Knox, right, which is the kind of the national reserve of gold bullion. But the thing is gold is a fixed resource. It's a finite resource, so it's technically deflationary, which means that the value of gold goes up drastically over time, particularly when it is used for that and hoarded, because the supply of gold goes down over time because it ends up in static coffers like Fort Knox. And so that was actually a big reason for the push for fiat currency. And it's kind of counterintuitive. It's like, yeah, but gold holds its value. It's like, well, yes, it does, but it is also a finite physical resource. And when you base an economy or a currency system on an arbitrary physical resource, that puts a lot of constraints on the economy in the long run. And that's actually why we moved to the fiat system, which we'll go over in just a moment. But one other thing that you need to know before we get too much further is just about the monetary system overall. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basically the monetary system is the set of structures and institutions and policies that dictate the supply of money and the circulation of money. So there's a few primary players. One is a central bank, like in America, we call it the Federal Reserve. There's commercial banks, which are the big for-profit banks, the loans and lending that drive much of the economy. So, for instance, if Microsoft takes out a loan, they go to a large commercial bank. The government also has a powerful role because what you might not realize is that the Federal Reserve is actually quasi-independent from the U.S. government. It's not entirely, and it's like, okay, well, it's called Federal Reserve, so kind of says that just in the name, it's closely tied with the federal government. However, the three branches of the government, the legislative, judicial, and executive branch, do also play a role in the economy. So there's two primary different ways. One is monetary policy, which has to do with the supply of money and the circulation of money, and then there's fiscal policy, which has to do with budgets. So it's one thing to keep in mind is that those are two separate things. We're not going to have a deep dive into the U.S. economy or global economy, but then the one last component of the monetary system is the international institutions, such as the World Bank, the IMF, and a few others. So basically, most economies are kind of islands unto themselves. The largest international entity that we have that is a monetary system is the European Union with the euro. And of course, like as people often remind me because I misstated it once, Britain is no longer part of the European Union. But anyways, they maintained the pound sterling separate from the euro anyways. So these kinds of tensions persist today, and this will actually figure greatly into kind of my reading of the tea leaves as to how AGI is going to impact the monetary system in the future. Okay, so as promised, we are now at the transition to fiat currency. So the transition to fiat currency was a very, very controversial move at the time. As far as I remember, there were threats of like some people thought that this was going to cause the second civil war. Like it was that bad. The idea was that by removing the gold standard, by saying, you know what, we're going to decouple the economy from this arbitrary physical resource, and now we're going to have this. We're going to enable this very flexible monetary policy where we can control inflation and deflation based on the printing of money. One thing to point out is that in the interceding time over the last century, all major economies have switched to fiat currency, which gives the people in control of the economy more levers over how the monetary system plays out, which is why we have things like, the Fed adjusted their interest rate. And so when the Fed adjusts their interest rate, basically what they're doing is they are changing the rate at which more money is introduced into the system in order to ideally control inflation and deflation. But as we've seen lately, the Fed is not always aware of all the variables at play, which is why we have very high inflation right now. And, like mortgage rates are close to 8%, which we haven't seen in America in I think 30 or 40 years. So something else is going on that is just beyond the monetary system's comprehension right now, which is interesting. Time will tell. But this has always been the case. So as we move forward, let's talk about alternatives. So one alternative that I remember was really popular in the 90s, and I think it survived into the early 2000s. I don't remember, but it was called e-gold. And so this was basically like a really early attempt at saying, let's bring back the gold standard, but we're going to allow you to buy and trade gold electronically. Now, obviously, we have ETFs today. You can have precious metal ETFs. So if you're not familiar, an ETF is an exchange-traded fund. So you can basically buy and sell like corn and oil futures and gold and platinum, pretty much any material you want. You can buy and sell on the stock market today. E-gold was an early attempt, and it had a pretty spectacular downfall with the founders getting arrested for money laundering and illegally running exchanges. So it was very interesting. Ensign, good to see you. Have a seat. I've noticed that you have not been availing yourself of the Officers Club. Now, as a member of this crew, you have a right and are entitled to join the Officers Club, which will be a critical part of your development as an officer and member of this crew. So, I just wanted to take this moment to invite you and say that you're really missing out by not joining in on the conversation. Now, of course, as any exclusive club, there are dues that are required, but the benefits, I guarantee you, will far outweigh the cost of joining the Officers Club. Carry on. Of course, we've also seen some very spectacular exchange crashes recently, and there's a lot of people that are very hurt by these exchange crashes. So, your mileage may vary, and everyone is obviously allowed to have their own opinion. In my personal opinion, I think that rogue exchanges probably ought to be shut down. Okay, so moving forward, obviously eGold was a failure. Blockchain is all the rage right now. And so what I want to do is I want to differentiate between blockchain and cryptocurrency. Blockchain is nothing other than a distributed public ledger. So what does that mean? Transactions are recorded publicly. Now, obviously you say, oh, well, transactions are recorded publicly. Great. That lends itself to cryptocurrency, but it also lends itself to other kinds of transactions. Several companies or countries have tried to move their stock exchanges to blockchain technology. I know at least one had to undo that because it didn't work out due to technical glitches. Other countries, some smaller countries, are trying to use blockchain to integrate for voting systems. So basically, the idea is that they're decentralized, they're highly secure, they're transparent, and so on and so forth, which all lends itself to saying like, hey, this is a great technology, because if it's tamper-proof, and everyone can inspect every transaction, then that would be really great for democracy. That would be really great for accountability and transparency. There are still a lot of technical bugs to hammer out with blockchain, but IBM, VMware, Microsoft, all the major tech companies are investing in blockchain research now. So that tells me that it's only a matter of time before we see blockchain literally everywhere. So this is one thing that I kind of count on in the future is blockchain for business, blockchain for government, blockchain for everything is probably coming. Now, cryptocurrency specifically is a kind of digital currency that is predicated on blockchain technology. And so basically you say, okay, by whatever means the cryptocurrency is generated, usually it's proof of stake, proof of work, that sort of thing. It's a cryptographic process, and then you generate electronic currency that the transactions happen on a blockchain. This is basically an unstoppable technology. And we'll get into that in a little bit when I kind of evaluate like what is the actual long-term aspect going to be. And I know that this video is about AGI and we're not there yet, but I needed to provide a little bit of background and framing so that you understand, okay, this is where I'm coming from. Obviously, cryptocurrency is a big topic. Not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining what cryptocurrency is. Just wanted to differentiate between blockchain and cryptocurrency. They're not the same thing. But you basically cannot have cryptocurrency without blockchain. So there you have it. Global currencies. So this is a hypothetical thing that doesn't exist yet, and it occurs to me that with the current trends, the U.S. petrodollar was an attempt at basically having one nation enforce a global reserve currency, but as we have seen. The time of the U.S. petrodollar is ending, if not already over. And now we have other economies such as China, the EU, America, all competing. And so rather than having one global currency, it seems like we're moving towards a place of having multiple global currencies. And so the idea, though, is that each of these currencies are still staked to various geopolitical entities. So, like, obviously, the U.S. manipulates the U.S. dollar for our favor. China manipulates its currency for its favor. The EU favors the euro for its purposes. And when you have the monetary system weaponized like this, because it's nothing short than weaponizing currency, that kind of doesn't lend itself to global peace and harmony. And so the idea is that maybe we should have a neutral global currency that is resistant to manipulation and resistant to tampering, that is also cross-border. And so this is where it's like, when I first heard of Bitcoin many, many years ago, I said, like, my initial reaction as soon as I like wrapped my head around it, I said, this is obviously the way of the future. Like, that was like very, like, I don't know if I said it out loud, but like I said it to myself. I was like, oh yeah, this is very obviously the way of the future. It solves so many problems. However, we're 14 years on into Bitcoin. And it hasn't taken over the world yet, but everyone knows about it at least. So the reason that I mentioned global currency is just because without a global currency, we humans are still in a somewhat precarious state in terms of our relationship to money. We don't have something that is 100% portable, except for cryptocurrency, and governments are not using cryptocurrency yet. Now, obviously, there are some experiments out there. People in Silicon Valley are trying something, like Sam Altman's WorldCoin. I personally think that WorldCoin is a bad idea, and like the idea that you need to scan your iris in order to even participate in the network is really kind of dystopian. I've read about experiments or thought experiments that basically say in the future we're all going to have crypto wallets, and rather than having one currency, we're going to have portfolios of currency, probably literally hundreds of currencies that are all automatically exchanged. And so, even if one currency is volatile, another one might, not be as volatile. And so that the idea is that you will actually have a composite global cryptocurrency in the future, which I think is one of the most likely outcomes in the long run. There are some major challenges to cryptocurrency in terms of why it has not been fully adopted, not the least of which is lack of regulation. By design, cryptocurrency is resistant to regulation. That's kind of the point. And because it is resistant to regulation and manipulation, that basically takes the power away from governments, which governments really don't like. But it puts it into the hands of less scrupulous organizations. And so we have seen plenty of evidence of cryptocurrency being manipulated by organized crime, particularly the Yakuza and the Russian mafia. It also allows it for a lot of illicit uses, such as black market exchanges. Now, obviously, people that are more in the individual liberty camp will say, well, this is a good thing, because if I now have a currency that allows me to buy and sell goods and services that the bully government tells me that I'm not allowed to sell, this is good for my individual freedom. Yes, but it's not necessarily good for the individual freedom of people that are victims of human trafficking. And so because of that, the reputation of cryptocurrency is deeply tarnished right now. And if the government's reaction to cryptocurrency is anything to go by, then the government's reaction to AGI will be probably equally as bad. And what I mean by that is they've been kind of slow to react, and rather than being proactive, they're barely even reactive, at least in my opinion, of the American government. And so that now, of course, like cryptocurrency has been declared not a currency; it is just it is a commodity, which is an interesting way of approaching it. But that's how the IRS classifies cryptocurrency: is it's not a currency, it's a commodity. Now, because cryptocurrency is highly portable, it is intrinsically borderless, which is really good and will help steer us towards that global economy. But again, the trust in cryptocurrency is really low right now, and there's a lot of technical problems that need to be ironed out. But in the long run, I do think that this is the way of the future. So this brings us to the possibility of a resource-based economy. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a resource-based economy, the idea is that you get rid of money or tender or any kind of that. You get rid of debt, and basically all goods and services are provided for free. They're just given to you. And the idea here is that, well, what we do is we move away from money and we just give people what they need, and we do this with technological hyperabundance, which is a lovely idea. However, there are a lot of problems with resource-based economies, not the least of which is how do you decide what gets exchanged? And this also fails to take into account scarce resources. It also fails to take into account human nature, which I think means that this is absolutely doomed to fail. But I needed to bring it up and just say, like, hey, yeah, there are some ideas here that, it could be more sustainable, it could be more egalitarian. And I'll say yes, but while I think that a totally resource-based economy is neither possible nor desirable, I will say that there are probably some aspects of a resource-based economy that we will see in the relatively near future. So this also can't mention resource-based economy without mentioning the Venus Project. This has been mentioned quite a few times in the comment section. So basically the Venus Project is an organization trying to bring this about, and they have very similar goals to what I have. Bring about some positive social change, high standards of living, get away from or move towards technological solutions, so on and so forth. So of course it's like, well, Dave, this is obviously a natural fit for you. Yes, but I don't agree with resource-based economy because you basically have to throw out some very important aspects about human nature in order to believe that this will work, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So basically, though, the question here is, should we abolish currency? What are the arguments for getting rid of it? And there are actually some good arguments for getting rid of money. First and foremost, promoting equality. If you say that equality is a good thing, if you say that income inequality is bad, that wealth inequality is bad, if your moral framework and your social objectives and your social policy say that, then like, yeah, destroying money could be a way of promoting equality. However, when you look at history, you don't necessarily need money to have wealth inequality. And I'm thinking about feudal lords. People who have control over land and other valuable resources still are the wealthiest. And so you could still have extreme wealth inequality with a resource based economy. And just destroying money is like, that's kind of a solution in search of a problem. That's just going after a symptom, not the actual root cause. So that's why I'm pretty skeptical of a resource based economy, at least a total resource based economy. Another hypothetical benefit of abolishing currency is reducing crime. If you get to a point where people have all of their basic needs met, that's something that I would advocate for, but I don't think that a resource-based economy is the way to get to it. But basically, you get rid of money, you get rid of cryptocurrency, you get rid of this abstract thing that is highly portable. That takes the wind out of the sails of organized criminals. You give all the people their basic needs met, and so then petty crime also goes away because then nobody has a reason to steal or do drugs because they're not trying to escape from the misery of being poor or whatever. Again, really good ideals, but I don't think this is the right approach. And then, of course, there's the technological feasibility. There's a lot of other problems with this, not the least of which is, okay, you get rid of people for, or not get rid of people, you get rid of money for people like you and me. That doesn't do anything to address international trade or commerce. And so this is what I think is one of the biggest gaps in terms of things like resource-based economics and the Venus Project, is that it only looks at the economy, the fiscal policy from an individual consumer level. It doesn't take into account the broader monetary system. So again, this is why I'm particularly skeptical of resource-based economics and the Venus Project. Now, again, I completely agree with some of the ideals and some of the goals. I just don't think it's the right approach. So on the flip side of that, there is also a lot of argument to be made for preserving currency, and not just one currency, but multiple currencies. So economic stability. The fact that we have many currencies to choose from globally is actually kind of a good thing. You can use the dollar here in the U.S. You can use euros in Europe. And also in many places, the economic system already allows you to just automatically exchange stuff. I remember when I visited France 10 years ago, I could use my Visa debit card anywhere and it would just automatically convert stuff. And so having multiple currencies that can be exchanged the world over, even with the geopolitical tensions that cause some currency manipulation, that's obviously suboptimal for stability in the long run. So there's some work to be done to create more comprehensive exchanges and maybe even nationless currencies, but we're a long ways off from that as a species. Like I said, the euro is the closest that we've got because it's not just one nation, it is a union of nations. But of course, there are plenty of problems with that, namely that the exchange rate favors some members of the EU over others. So will we end up with a global set of reserve currencies? Who knows? But valuation. So remember how earlier we talked about that currency was a good unit of account as well as a medium of exchange? This to me is why currency and money is such a powerful invention for us humans, is that it is not obvious from nature, but because we have a need for possession, we have a need for appraising value, creating an abstract representation of value is really a great invention. And there's all kinds of other reasons that flow into this, which I'll unpack a few in just a moment. But I think it would be kind of silly to do away with one of our most powerful economic inventions. So I'm strongly in the camp of keep currency. There's a lot of reasons to keep it. Now, another reason is even if you wanted to get rid of currency, you wanted to abolish fiat currency, you wanted to abolish gold as a medium of exchange, and you wanted to abolish cryptocurrency, you kind of can't.
You can do that? Can't stop the signal now.
But cryptocurrency is very resilient by design. It is decentralized, it is borderless, it is user-controlled. Getting rid of cryptocurrency is basically going to be impossible. So whether or not you agree with the existence of cryptocurrency, good luck turning it off. And so again, I often will favor a realistic view, not an idealized view. And it's like, well, yeah, you can wish for a cashless future in which there is no money and there's no economy and everyone just gets what they needs and it's all hunky dory. But I don't see that as practically happening, whether or not we have AGI, in order to provide all those goods and services and to allocate resources. So like going back to the idea of resource-based economy and AGI, like I don't think AGI really plays a factor here. Now, one thing that I will agree with, though, is that in the age of AGI, when we have energy abundance, when we have no jobs, because AI has taken it all, I do suspect that we will have a reduced need for cash on a day-to-day basis. And so what I mean by this is, okay, AGI can provide any service for basically free, any necessary service, whether it's building a house, repairing your house, providing legal counsel or, therapy or whatever. Like AGI is probably, hopefully, not going to have the same kind of possessive view of money that we have. And as long as it's, relatively aligned, we should be in a situation where many goods and services become incredibly cheap to practically free. The marginal cost of many goods and services will be near zero. And so those might be public services. And so the best model that we have for this is public roads and public schools. And so if we imagine that government provided services will expand, at least somewhat, when it makes economic sense, then it's like, okay, well, you don't have to like send your child to school with money every day to pay a toll to get into school. Obviously, there are private schools. But imagine that like your power bill is basically paid for by the state. Your internet is paid for by the state. And oh, by the way, there are some nations that already do this. Your healthcare is already paid for by the state. So that like most of what you need on a day-to-day basis, money just never enters the picture. So some people will say, well, yeah, that's what we mean by resource-based economy. It's like, yeah, but you can't get away from money in totality. And so we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. There are some durable needs for currency. So even if we get to a future, and I suspect that we get to a future where you don't need money on a day-to-day basis, you could probably go for days, weeks, even months without, your wallet, because we get to a point where most of your daily necessities are provided, either through some sort of redistributive policy or whatever. There are always going to be scarce goods and services. And so what I mean by that is, favored vacation spots or fancy concerts or nice dinners. These are all things that figure into the human condition. And things like resource-based economics seem to just gloss over that fact. And so when you gloss over that fact, when you ignore the fact that like it is just human nature to want nice things. And now, obviously, everyone to everyone, a quote unquote nice thing or desirable thing is different. Some people want a fancy house, want a fancy car, want to live by the beach, want to live on the lake. And then there's also people who want to live simply and humbly, as I've mentioned in other videos. I want to live like a hobbit in the countryside, but that is still something that I want. And I need a system in which I can work towards that and earn it and basically guarantee, have some sort of self-direction in order to decide my own fate rather than just having it fully just allocated to me by some arbitrary decision. Particularly an arbitrary decision made by an algorithm. That's no way to live, because taking agency, taking authority away from someone actually runs directly contrary to human nature and basic human needs. And so it's like, well, you don't want to deprive people of individuality and personhood, because then we're no better than the Borg. There's also luxury goods. Now, obviously, some people are like, yeah, but luxury goods are only for the rich and to hell with them. As I'm reading this book called The Status Game, I'm realizing that everyone wants more status, and luxury goods and luxury experiences are just one way of doing that. And even if you de-identify with that, even if you have like nothing but resentment and contempt for the rich, you're still a human being, and you also deserve some level of status, and you want to be able to earn some level of status. And in no way am I saying, this is a carte blanche. The rich are all righteous and virtuous. I'm not making the argument of like virtuous billionaires. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that it is human nature to want nice things. And those nice things vary from person to person and from culture to culture. So therefore, it would probably be a bad idea to just try and come up with a system that deprives everyone of this basic need. There's also high-tech goods. So when you look at everything that goes into like your Xbox and your phone and your VR goggles, right? Like I was completely blown away because just the expansion for Cyberpunk 2077, the Phantom Liberty expansion, cost them $120 million to develop. Now, obviously, in the near future, hopefully AGI makes it basically free to build any video game that you want, but it's always possible that there's going to be some resources that go into these things, whether it's energy, raw materials, compute time with the AGI, because the AGIs might not be free to run. And so these high-tech goods are always going to have some cost associated with them. So I don't see getting away from from all currency, because it's like, hey, well, I built this thing, and if you want it from me, you need to trade something. So if you forcibly get rid of money, then you're still just going to immediately get back to a barter system. So you might as well have an abstract reserve of value. So there are a lot of arguments to be made for keeping currency around. And so then this goes back to what I was talking about, which is prestige and wealth. Even with AGI, like, yes, some people would like to kind of enforce their view of the world, of an idealized form of humanity that doesn't have, class and wealth and prestige. But one thing that I want to point out is that I don't even know that people that want to get rid of that are in the majority. I think that people that want to do away with all wealth and prestige and luxury are probably in the extreme minority. Maybe I'll run a poll for this. So basically, a small minority wants to impose their will on the majority, and that's just not how things work. Now, I also have had some discussions, and some people want to check out of the system, and I think that that's possibly going to be one of the options, which is basically, hey, you can completely ignore the rat race, particularly if we get to a point where AGI is able to provide most goods and services that you need on a daily basis. However, you're not going to be able to enforce that on everyone, nor would you want to. And also, the people with vested interest aren't going to allow you to do it. So again, whatever an individual believes is the ideal way, it has to also be practical and feasible to get there. And I just don't see it as happening. Now, in the long run, long run, I don't mean like the next decade, when we have early AGI. I mean, over the next century, over the next 1,000 years, as we have AGI and more AGI and superintelligence, I would not be surprised if we end up with entire generations of people that grow up and just don't care about money. And so I think that we will adapt as a species over time. But even in a million years, well, maybe a million years when we've completely evolved, but over the next century, I don't see a compelling reason or path to getting rid of money. So my personal conclusion, here's the long story short. I don't think that we're going to see the abolition of currency. I just don't see a good reason for it. I don't see a good path. And I see a lot of arguments to the contrary. I think we're going to stick around. We're going to keep money for a lot of reasons. I think that the money system could be better. As I pointed out, there's, the fact that money is weaponized right now through geopolitical tensions, I think it's kind of dumb. I think we need to evolve past that. I think that we need to mature as a species and like get our act together and actually come together and create several global reserve currencies that are more democratically implemented and controlled. But we're a ways off from that. I do, however, see a drastically reduced role of currency in our day-to-day lives. So basically, I would not be surprised if, 10 to 20 years from now, hopefully sooner, but basically AGI and hyperabundance are providing most of what we need on a day-to-day basis, such that the cost of those things becomes trivial. So like, you want to go to a restaurant, you get your meal for free, and it's a nice meal. You want a decent house, your first house is free. Second houses you probably have to pay for. This is actually something that we talked about in my Discord server. Was like, I posted a video a while ago where I said, like, we could provide a free tiny house to everyone today. And a lot of people are like, I don't want a tiny house. Don't make me live in a pod. And I'm like, that's not the point. The point is we have the technology to provide it for free today. Anyways, my point now is that with AGI, with advanced robotics, we can probably provide everyone a decent house for free in the relatively near future, and that you would only need to pay for a second house in cash. And again, like, how do you decide who gets which house? If you want a luxury house, you probably have to pay more for it. There's a lot of details to work out. But the other point here is that money actually really helps you make those decisions. Because it's like you say, hey, I've accumulated $20,000 and I can trade this for, a decent little cottage in the countryside, or I can save up $20 million and get, a Malibu house. Up to you, however you want to spend it. And so for the sake of individual liberty, I think that we probably need to keep money. And also for the sake of human nature, we need to keep money. But again, I think that, we're going to see a reduced use for money on a day-to-day basis. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you got a lot out of this. I really enjoyed working with my Patreon community in order to brainstorm this video. And obviously, not everyone has to agree. The future will play out how it plays out. And I'll be curious to see which way it goes. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, etc., etc. Cheers.